I'll now introduce our General Manager, Andrea Rowe, who is our dangerous goods specialist. Good morning, Andrea, and welcome once again, and to take us through this interesting topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. And so today we will talk about flammable liquids, and we've got a couple of other items to share about flammable liquids, being petrol at the petrol station. And we'll introduce you to our online learning. So, as always, we have a question of the week. This time we're asking two. So if you'd like to participate and give your opinion or a guess in the chat, the first one, question of the week, do you need an external person to conduct rack inspection? So this is racking, like pallet racking, right, Gary?
Correct, and we're referring here to the annual rack inspection as specified in the Australian Standard for steel pallet racking. Yes.
Thank you. I will tell you the answer afterwards. And question number two came out of an interesting case Gary read this week. And so we posed the question, are alcohol-based hand sanitizers dangerous? We know a lot of workplaces do have those, and we'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Indeed, Andrew, just before we leave that, in fact, not only is there an issue, they were specified to be 70% alcohol-based hand sanitizers throughout the whole COVID pandemic, as many people remember. So there was that.
Yes, so that was the recommendation from the World Health Organization and authorities, and we know a lot of workplaces still provide this for their staff and people that attend them. No doubt everyone in Melbourne heard a couple of weeks ago about a big flammable liquids fire in Derrimut, and if anyone's driven past there, you'll see there's not much left of that factory, except for some, a whole pile of drums and burnt building material. So following this incident, WorkSafe Victoria have issued warnings, and it's not the only fire that's occurred with flammable liquids premises recently. So WorkSafe have, sent out alerts to businesses, especially businesses identified as storing flammable liquids. So I would, I believe businesses that are registered, so have manifest quantities and have notification to WorkSafe, have specifically been warned. And the particular warning about these fires is about the dangers of static electricity or other ignition sources in these areas storing flammable liquids.
Andrea, just before you move on, if I can just ask a question of you, if I may. So we're going to look at static electricity, but you just mentioned the term manifest quantity. So for some of our listeners, you may not be able to tell for every single class, but what is manifest quantity broadly? What does that actually mean? And how do people know they are over or under the manifest quantity? What have they got to do?
Well, ultimately, you want to have at least an estimate of the maximum amount of each class of dangerous goods that you have. So if you have, depending on the packing group, so the actual classification of the chemical, for flammable liquids, this might be between 250 litres where you need placarding, but certainly if you're looking in the range of 10,000 litres for flammable liquids, you would be, and it varies with packaging group, but you would then, once you exceed in the regulations what's called manifest quantity, your premises needs to have dangerous goods manifest, and also send notifications to WorkSafe and consult the fire department about your emergency plan. So there's some additional obligations.
Do we have a table for that, just those manifest quantities? If somebody listening wants to call us or email for a copy of a table that gives those quantities?
Yep. We sure do. We've got a fact sheet on that. So if anyone wants that, just let us know.
Sorry for that interruption, Andrea. Back to static electricity. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so thanks, Gary. So this is obviously a bigger issue where the facilities store very large amounts of flammable liquids. And so that's where you see this significant fire that sent toxic smoke across Melbourne several weeks ago. However, the risk of static electricity, and ignition sources around flammable liquids vapor, it can still apply to using much smaller amounts. So, even if you only have a drum of chemical, if you were to be pouring that, there still could be an ignition source risk and a risk of a spark causing a fire. Yeah. So that's the hazard there, is the risk of ignition sources around flammable liquids. So what should businesses do, aside from their compliance requirements, if you have very large amounts? What should you do? And in summary, and we've detailed this, there's more details, and linked to the WorkSafe alerts in our newsletter. But essentially, you need to eliminate ignition sources in hazardous areas. So that's in hazardous zones, so where flammable liquids vapors exist. So that means any electrical or pumps or equipment used to transfer flammable liquids needs to be intrinsically safe, and the same applies to other, equipment in the area like forklifts, if you do have a hazardous area. And when transferring the liquid, so where there's flowing liquid, equipment, the vessels and containers should be bonded together, which can be done by, as we were discussing before, Gary, by having the containers touching.
Yep.
Or by using a bonding strap.
Yeah, so Andrew, on that one, as I mentioned, so for people listening, it could be as simple as filling up a lawnmower, and sometimes we need to refill the mower and it's still hot because we've been mowing, and you'll only wait so long, and the best advice is wait till the mower cools down. But most of us don't want to do that. We're actually out mowing the lawn now and we need to top up the mower. So if you don't have alligator clamps with wire cable between them to bond your two containers together, the best advice is for the containers to touch together, not holding it up in the air as people pour, but rather touching together is effectively doing the bonding that the cables would do, Andrew. That's what I mentioned earlier.
Thank you. And then the other part of, so the containers and then the vessels should also be grounded, so earthed, so touching the earth or grounded. Yeah. And other recommendations, and there is a longer list, but avoid splash filling. So avoid just pouring, like we mentioned about having the containers touching, and pouring or using a purpose-built pump to transfer the liquids. And there is you can use the Australian standard AS 1940 to identify, the volumes of flammable liquids that are likely to create a hazardous area, which tells you where you need to control ignition sources. So there's different volumes. So if it's in an open container, once you have 5 litres or more in an open container, you need to control ignition sources in that area, where if you have closed containers, it's a much larger volume. And just another reminder on what WorkSafe expects companies to have if you do have hazardous areas, is that they expect hazardous area classification and static electricity control plans to be in place, and WorkSafe have said that they will be doing inspections, especially of premises that have declared that they have manifest quantities of flammable liquids. So I expect they'll start there, but have a look at your equipment and look at your flammable liquid transferring processes if you transfer flammable liquids at your workplace. And now, Gary, this is an interesting one that I believe we wrote about in our newsletter many years ago. And from memory, I think there was some sort of alert about transferring flammable liquids, and we were actually contacted by emergency services to correct us and tell us that actually that's a myth. Mobile phones do not start fires when refueling. And so again, more recently, there was an article in, I think you found it in the Drive magazine, Gary?
Correct. Thanks, Andrea. This has been featured in that television, excuse me, program Mythbusters. And I believe that Mythbusters, the television program, have revisited this topic, I think 2 or even 3 times because of persistent calls from people to say, but every fuel station, pretty well worldwide, is saying don't use your mobile phone at petrol stations. And whilst no one, from the knowledge that we've got, Andrea, and from the information we've gotten from the research, has ever demonstrated that a mobile phone has ever ignited and caused a fire at a petrol station, I think the answer from the petroleum companies is they're extra cautious and they're maintaining their view. So it is not a legal requirement, but a company rule. So it's the company rule of the fuel companies that when you're on their premises using their petrol pumps, they're telling you what their company rule is, but you won't be prosecuted by WorkSafe because there is no regulation prohibiting the use of mobile phones at these locations. But it's a fuel company rule. The fuel companies believe it is still best practice, but no one has ever demonstrated and shown under controlled conditions that any mobile phone, even faulty ones, can actually ignite the fumes at a petrol station. And I think you pointed out to me, Andrew, and reminded me what they have demonstrated is that people getting in and out of the car have actually caused and ignited fires. And that's the static electricity that you mentioned.
And we actually had some data from the Australian Transport Safety Bureau. They did an analysis of 243 petrol station fires, and they found not one was occurred by a mobile phone. But what they found is that most petrol station fires were caused by static electricity, and most likely when a person got into the car while refueling and back out.
That's it. And one of the comments we got here, Andrew, is probably from one of our listeners right now, it could be Drew. Somebody else.
Carol, thanks.
Carol, thanks for that. Yeah. Could be the distraction, a bit like on aeroplanes, and they tell you to turn off the phone on the planes. It's because people won't listen to emergency instructions. And I think that's probably fair game. So it's a petroleum company rule, but I think of bigger importance, as you've said, Andrea, is don't get back into the car, number one. So if you've got, I think people have had nylon jumpers and coats, and as they move around and maybe make contact with the car and the fuel pump, this is what creates the risk at a fuel station. So be careful with your clothing, loose clothing. Make sure the nozzle's in contact with the car, fill the car and close put the nozzle up and close the cap as quickly as possible before actually entering the car or doing any other things. I think around a petrol station, I think is the key answer there, Andrea.
Yes, indeed. And that's the advice from the petrol companies is, and of course, no smoking or other flames around the refueling area.
Actually, Andrew, I can't resist it. It's, if I may, coming up in our next newsletter, because we've got a feature on motor vehicle and driving safety. One of the questions, because we're on the topic today at service stations, as you may recall, Andrea, is how young can we allow children to be to fill up at a service station? And so just letting everyone know, we're going to have that in our next newsletter, but it's an interesting one. As to whether there's any specific laws on children getting out of your car and asking them or allowing them to fill up your car, and if so, at what age are they allowed to do that? So we're going to cover that in the next newsletter because it varies by state, Andrea. So I just thought I'd mention that before you move on to.
All right, and I might, you might tell me whether or not I should continue to allow my 10-year-old son to help refuel.
Exactly, and maybe he's a bit young yet, according to what we'll tell you. Yes.
Okay, so Gary, I'll let you tell us about your question. So, do you need an external person to conduct the annual rack inspection?
Thanks, Andrea. Some people that have steel pallet racking would know that last year Standards Australia released a new standard on steel pallet racking. Within the new standard, so the actual design and safety of the racking is essentially the same. So they haven't increased the size of the beams or more bolts to hold them down or more safety clips to hold the beams in place. So the standard for the most part has remained the same, but what they have referred to as formal inspections and informal. And they say informal inspections are these are the ones done by internal staff, so your own employees checking racking periodically. They don't tell you how often. They don't tell you. They haven't provided a checklist for it. We have. If anyone wants one, we'll send you a pallet rack inspection checklist. They haven't said how frequently they should do it for these internal inspections. We think something like monthly inspections might be appropriate, but gee, it varies a lot between a very busy warehouse with stock coming and going at a rapid rate and very heavily loaded racking to some depots that have steel pallet racking, but almost nothing gets changed, Andrea. So the stock sits there months at a time or years. Our good friends at Toyota have got to hold parts for 10 years for every make and model. So all of that old stock is sitting there, not moving from one year to the next, by and large. So in fact, the racking's not going to get damaged by frequent use and interface with a forklift. So let's turn to, this is about the formal inspections, and the standard doesn't specifically state that you can't do these internally, but they make it clear that it needs to be by a competent person, and they state that a competent person is the manufacturer or supplier of the racking by default. So they're not excluding somebody else, but they're saying by default, whoever supplied you the racking and the racking manufacturer staff are deemed competent persons, and they can inspect. They can do the formal inspection, which is recommended to be done annually. So the Australian standard now says internal inspections, you can work out your frequency and what you do and who does it. The formal inspection, they recommend annually by competent people. They're inferring external. So the answer is no, it does not have to be external, but if you do use the supplier or manufacturer, that would be automatically accepted as a competent person. So if you haven't already trained your people in how to do, or key, say, engineer or key maintenance person or key warehouse staff to do inspections, they may not be regarded as competent. So we've got a workshop next week. Unfortunately, no more bookings for that here in Melbourne for next week, but we often do it in-house for anyone who has larger scale warehousing, steel pallet racking. We can provide the training. And so if people like we and other people in your suppliers and manufacturers can train key people to be competent persons to do that annual inspection. So you don't have to be an external person, but you do need to be a competent person to do those.
And it sounds like, Gary, it would still be beneficial for businesses that have pallet racking to have a trained or competent person, so that when they do their regular workplace inspections, they can actually identify if something doesn't look right.
Correct.
Such as well, obviously physical damage should be reported straight away, but we know other things happen, like the pins come out of the racking and that kind of thing, which a trained person would be more likely to pick up on.
And as you know, Andrew, a number of our good clients have already done that training for their team, their warehouse and logistics team, so they can be more confident and competent in doing those internal and periodic or regular checks of their racking. And we've always said you know, rule of thumb, your local team check your racking monthly, say, but I said the high variation in logistics centres and how busy they are, and annually maybe external. But if you've got a lot of racking and you've got trained people, they could do that annual inspection for you.
Thank you, Gary. Now, I just a reminder, there are some online learning courses that we've now put on our website. And this was by, you know, popular request for companies that, you know, maybe only had a small number of people needing training and didn't, you know, or interstate, but still wanted to have some training. And which one of them includes, we've just launched the rack inspection certificate. So just the, you know, the basic principles of the rack inspections is now available online. Now, for our safety helpline customers, there's no fee for any of these trainings, and there's a small fee for on the public areas of our websites. So just let us know if you need to know more about those. And the second question of the week, are alcohol-based hand sanitizers dangerous? Tell us about that, Gary.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Apologies for chuckling and laughing. It's only because, as everyone will know, that if you go back just a few short years ago, during the worst of the COVID pandemic, not only did we have alcohol-based hand sanitizers everywhere, in every building, in every office, in every workplace, and in fact they still exist as a history carry over from that. We have in our office hand sanitizer at front reception, down in the kitchen area and throughout the office, and we have it out in the foyer and the lifts. So these still exist everywhere, and we were told by the health department the hand sanitizer had to be alcohol based, and in fact not only alcohol based but at least 70% alcohol. And you may remember, Andrea, you had a supplier approach you with some non-alcohol based sanitizer, and we still got some containers of it in our office.
We did, and we bought it because of the supply issues that we couldn't get hold of any of the 70% recommended one, and we've had since you know, donated some to people with various allergies that couldn't use
the
flammable one.
So during COVID, we had health regulations mandate alcohol-based hand sanitizers. So the only reason I was chuckling and smiling is because recently in Canberra, at a science exhibition, a student had suffered hand burns to the hands and wrist when the alcohol-based hand sanitizer that he'd used at the centre ignited, touching a plasma globe. So there's a plasma globe with all the lovely sparks inside the you may have seen them in the big glass containers, and so that, if you like, maybe static electricity ignited the hand sanitizer, which was provided by the Science Centre. So guess what? Now WorkSafe are prosecuting the centre for having alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Isn't this interesting? So during COVID, it was mandated. We had to have it as 70% alcohol-based. Now you can be prosecuted for having alcohol-based hand sanitizer because it's dangerous, because it actually is a fire risk. So my only amusement here is not that it's wrong. Clearly, we don't want any people to sustain burns. And even during COVID, I think, as you point out, Andrea, we knew that we had some clients, like, for example, allergy concerns, or there's always been ignition risks in some of our clients' businesses where they might have open flames and other ignition sources. It was never safe to use alcohol-based sanitizer in every application. So here we've now got is an unfortunate accident, thankfully not too serious as I understand, but this case is going to be heard, I believe, in the Magistrates Court in Canberra next month. So we'll update you in a future edition of the outcome of this prosecution. But in short, the Science Centre is now prosecuted because what they did is provided alcohol-based, and WorkSafe are now alleging they should have used hand soap and water or a non-alcohol-based sanitizer as an alternative in this centre. So isn't this interesting? During COVID, one department mandated health alcohol-based. Now we've got WorkSafe prosecuting because they did provide alcohol-based. There's nothing wrong. I think WorkSafe need to follow up on incidents and accidents. Excuse me. What I thought should have happened though is a bulletin from WorkSafe about this, both during COVID, to tell us, yes, you mandate to use 70% alcohol based, but you need to do a risk assessment, and some of the alternatives which may not be 70% alcohol based, but you need to in a certain situation for safety, which overrides the health requirement. This is what you should have done, and I think that's a bit that's missing here, and we'll update our listeners and readers of our safety newsletter after this case is heard.
And thanks, Matthias, for the comment. He's also mentioned about the without talking of the absorption of alcohol through the skin, which is not the best solution for children. Yes. And we just spoke about this morning. And Tracy had mentioned, childcare centres were finding, some children would lick their hands and that sort of stuff, and actually exactly. Be consuming some alcohol.
So these are all valid points, and it's interesting to hear there's not just one reason why we may not or should not have alcohol-based hand sanitizer in certain locations. And I hadn't thought it until Tracy mentioned it. Thanks, Tracy, part of our team, that children might lick their hands a bit more and ingest more alcohol. And for small bodies, that you might think it's not much alcohol, but that's ingesting quite a bit of alcohol. I think there's dermatitis reasons. You can defat your hands with overuse of sanitizers, and I think alcohol-based. So there's a number of reasons, and in essence, WorkSafe in Canberra alleging they didn't do a risk assessment for this alcohol-based hand sanitizer. So maybe,
and I guess, Gary, it does prompt the wider issue of, in some times we think that something is essential, to give the safety that we need. And then in future we find, so for example, asbestos, I think at one time was actually considered to be a very good thing, and it may well have saved buildings from burning down. So there was a safety benefit there, but we've since learnt that, it's very dangerous for the workers' lungs.
Yes, absolutely, Andrea. So that's a little bit on alcohol-based hand sanitizers as the second question of the week. And so could they be dangerous? The answer is yes, they could be. And I'm just seeing here, don't they use it in every healthcare setting between patients?
Yeah.
And I think Tracy was saying, well, doctors wash their hands before surgery with soap and water, with soap and water.
But Ken is reminding us that they don't always have the hand basins, in every available room. So, I think it really needs to be a case-by-case situation of where you could apply. So I don't think this case is saying, to now ban the 70% alcohol, but we certainly need to consider if it's
I think everyone needs to do
in all situations.
Everyone should do a risk assessment for their circumstances, both the risk assessment to cover the health aspects, as in dermatitis, allergies, ingesting, the kids licking for hand, and also fire risk. So just do a risk assessment for your circumstances and arrive at the best overall lowest risk situation, I think, Andrea.
Yeah, because I think there's no doubt that this 70% alcohol sanitizer will prevent the spread of germs, but we need to consider the other risks.
That's it.
So thank you everyone for joining us, and lovely to see some familiar faces that continue to support our webinars. We really appreciate that. Please do send us any questions through. You can also email us. And until next month, well, thank you for joining our webinar today.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, everyone, once again. Bye.